So thanks for coming back. This is our second session on Call of the Divine Beloved. In the first session, we introduced the volume and we looked at the poem that opens the volume, the Rashi Amma, and I shared the video of it with some friends and posted it privately on YouTube, and I got some feedback from various people, which is great because it's hard not to go wrong in certain places or to say some things that might not be entirely correct. And so I got some feedback, and I can incorporate it into the next session. And so it's a nice, I think, feature of sharing it a little bit more broadly as we go. One of the bits of feedback I received was we actually know very little about the exact timing of the works that were revealed during the Baghdad period. And so how do we know, for example, that the Rashi was revealed in the dungeon of Tehran? We actually don't know. It's an inference from the content of the tablet that it references what Baha'u'llah later describes in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. And so there are different theories about when exactly it was revealed, but it was in any case revealed around that time. But for historical accuracy, we want to be clear about what we can say with certainty and what we can't. Another point that was made, and this was in verse 5 of the Rashi Amma, where Baha'u'llah says that the treasuries of love lay hid within the very heart of Fars. I said that refers to Persia. It probably more accurately refers to a province within Persia, in the south of Persia, which includes Shiraz. So when Baha'u'llah refers to the treasuries of love that lay hid within the very heart of Fars, it's more likely a reference to the revelation of the Bab, which originated and was first proclaimed in Shiraz. And if perhaps it also applies to Persia more generally, then you have also the possibility of it referring simultaneously in a way to the Bab and to Baha'u'llah. And a third bit of feedback I received, behold the garden blooming fair. This was one of the last verses. And that was interpreted and read as the garden blooming fair, as halate bostan. And someone wrote back and said, well, it could also be read by just changing the short vowel, halate bastan, which could be something more like the bastan are those whose hearts are bound, or lovers. And actually, it rhymes better with maston. You have hear ye the sodded lovers sighs, maston, and behold the garden blooming fair, baston. In which case the translation of it would be behold the garden blooming fair. Hear ye the sodded lovers sighs, behold their rapturous state, or something like that. So that's another possible reading of the which would actually change the translation. And but so these are all bits of feedback we received, and I hope to receive feedback on things that I say today, which can, if and when, as inevitably I will, say some things that may not be entirely accurate. So we'll introduce today Baha'u'llah's greatest composition, the Seven Valleys. Greatest mystical composition, Shoghi Effendi says. And he in God Passes By, he identifies this as the greatest mystical work of Baha'u'llah, just as he identifies the Kitab-i Igan, or Book of Certitude, as his greatest doctrinal composition, and the Hidden Words as his greatest ethical composition. Interesting that this trilogy of greatest works of Baha'u'llah were all revealed in the Baghdad period prior to his open declaration of his mission. We'll talk a little bit about the context of the revelation of the Seven Valleys, the time and the place. All of the comments that I'll be sharing with you are only a fraction of what could be said. There are a lot more details, both about the historical context of this time period, and quite a bit more details about the content that are readily available online. This work perhaps is the most interpreted and commented upon work of Baha'u'llah's, or one of the two or three most interpreted and commented upon. And there are many study guides that are out there for people who want to go into it more deeply. One of the most recent and most comprehensive in English is Giulio Savi's Towards the Summit of Reality, and which is available through George Ronald. And if you really want to get into the details, almost word for word, you can also, in just the first few paragraphs of the Seven Valleys, you get a sense of the depth of commentary that can be provided at a word for word level in Stephen Lambden's commentary on the Exordium and the opening really paragraph of the Seven Valleys, and that's also available online. Beyond that, there are courses on the Seven Valleys given by the Wilmette Institute occasionally, and lots more material presented there. So what we can say about the circumstances of the revelation of the Seven Valleys, unfortunately, as with all of the works of this period, it's very difficult to date it extremely precisely. We know that it was revealed after the revelation of the Rashi Amma, which we discussed last week, so it was post 1851. We know it was revealed before the declaration of Baha'u'llah in 1863. We also know it was revealed after Baha'u'llah's return from his retreat to the Kurdistan, which took place over a 2-year period from 1854 to 1856, during which time he lived with the Sufis in the mountains of Kurdistan and as one of them. This 2-year period of Baha'u'llah, this retreat from the world, is comparable to the retreat of Moses on Mount Sinai and the 40 days in the wilderness that Jesus spent, and Muhammad's retreat to the cave outside Mecca. So the exact date of this is after that retreat, but very likely before the revelation of the Gems of Divine Mysteries, the Jawahir al-Asrar, which in content forms a bridge between the themes in the Seven Valleys and the themes in the Book of Certitude, which was revealed probably 1861 or 1862. So we're talking about likely the late 1850s. There's really a lot about this period that we don't know about, not beyond the dating of things. We don't know in detail what Baha'u'llah was doing. Those around him, by and large, had no awareness yet of his prophetic mission, of his prophetic calling, and so there weren't people tracking his every move and writing down everything he said. And so he was able to live in relative anonymity, even at that time he was considered a leader of the Babi movement. An example of how little we know about this period is that it's apparent that during this time Baha'u'llah had come to be regarded as an alchemist, and many mystically inclined people had written to him asking him about the secret of alchemy. And there's a large body of tablets of Baha'u'llah that were revealed during this period in answer to these questions, which address the topic explicitly, all the way down to describing the process of the production of the elixir. Baha'u'llah's exact intentions in this body of works remain unclear, but certainly alchemy and mysticism are intimately related. And the metaphor of alchemy as a way of describing the spiritual transformation of the human soul from copper to gold is is taken to be one of the goals, if not the ultimate goal and reference point of the mystics as well as of the alchemists. And we see this theme of divine alchemy appearing in the Kitab-i-Gan. So this whole period of Baha'u'llah's ministry is wrapped in with these mystical themes and these Sufi themes. Sufi being the mystical branch of Islam. that that has a very long heritage within Islam, that crosses the boundaries between Sunni and Shi'i. There are Sufi orders both among the Sunnis as well as among the Shias. And one of the Sufis who came to regard and respect Baha'u'llah as a source of mystical knowledge, his name was Sheikh Mohideen. He was the Qadi, or judge of Khaniqain, and was a spiritual leader of one of the Sufi orders in Kurdistan, the Qadiriya order. Asked Baha'u'llah some questions about, presumably because we don't have the text of the questions, they've not survived, asked questions of Baha'u'llah about, probably about the meaning of certain passages of mystical poetry. And Baha'u'llah's response in the Seven Valleys quotes extensively from a large number of preeminent mystical poets in Persian, and gives Baha'u'llah's implicit interpretations of these poems. A common theme across all Sufi orders, as well as a theme, a very central theme in the Seven Valleys, is the goal of attaining spiritual ecstasy. As we'll see throughout these valleys, as they culminate in the final valley of the burning away of the self, and reunion with the beloved. The context of the publication and translation of the Seven Valleys is that it has always been one of the first tablets of Baha'u'llah that's been made available both in the original language and in translation. I happen to have the first edition, the first published edition of the Seven Valleys in Persian. It was published according to the Colophon in 1312 AH, and Baha'u'llah passed away in 1309. So this was around 1895, and so this is one of the earliest publications of Baha'u'llah's writings, and it's a compilation of the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys. Just as we have, I'll pass it around so you can enjoy it. You can look at it. It's pretty sturdy, but handled with care. It combines the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys, just as the original English translation also combined the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys. And a passage in the Seven Valleys towards the end created, I think, in the minds of many a false sense of the unity of these two tablets, because towards the end of the Seven Valleys, Baha'u'llah says that reaching the end point of the journey is just the first station of the heart, and the heart has four stages, and when you then turn the page and you go to the Four Valleys, you think, well, these must be the four stages of the heart that Baha'u'llah was describing, but they're actually not. The four stages of the heart are entirely different things, as we'll discuss when we get to it. And so the Four Valleys and Seven Valleys are two orthogonal descriptions of the spiritual journey. Orthogonal, I mean, in almost like perpendicular. The Seven Valleys is a description of stages that a single seeker might traverse, whereas the Four Valleys is a description of four different kinds of seekers, or four different means of spiritual wayfaring. And so one of the goals of the retranslation of the Seven Valleys and Four Valleys is to break that implicit joining together that has been there in the minds of many of the English readers, breaking it by adding further tablets and actually physically separating them. So in the volumes, they have the Seven Valleys and then several tablets, and then ending with the Four Valleys. Another reason for the retranslation work is that while beautiful, the translation of Ali Quli Khan and Marzieh Gale, which dates to 1945, didn't include or did not make use of and was not well aligned with the vocabulary of the revelation, which is implicit in Shoghi Effendi's translations. And so by bringing the translation more in line with how Shoghi Effendi translated the writings, it makes it easier to read the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys in light of other works of Baha'u'llah, because they now share a more common vocabulary. There also were a number of minor errors, some of which could easily lead to different interpretations. And I'll try to point those out as we go along and contrast with the older translation when we reach points where there are significant differences between the two. So the Seven Valleys, to try to summarize it, originally was known as a Risalah Suluk, or the treatise on wayfaring. Because it contains 7 valleys, it became known as the Haft Vadi, or seven valleys in Persian. On the surface, the work, the 7 valleys, recapitulates or is a restatement of a much earlier and very famous Sufi work by Fariduddin Attar called Conference of the Birds, which was written in the 12th century, so many centuries old. The Conference of the Birds is a mystical work describing the journey of a flock of birds through various valleys as they search the Simorgh, who's the bird who is the object of their quest. And as they pass through each valley, certain of the birds fall away until when they reach the final valley, this valley of annihilation, or the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness, there are only 30 birds left. And 30 in Persian is si, and bird is morg. So you have si morg are the remaining band of seekers, and they were searching a bird whose name was the si morg. So which kind of reveals the end and the beginning a bit, because what they find is that the object of their quest lied within themselves from the very beginning. So it ended up being the unity of the lover and the beloved represented in the name of the bird that those 30 birds were, that the final 30 birds had attained. And this message is beautifully expressed in there's several translations of the Conference of the Birds which are available in English. I have a couple here. One of them is by C.S. Knott, and he has a few. It has translated a couple of course, the entire work, but these passages on the nature of the Simorgh are interesting and relevant. He says, all that which is produced by his shadow becomes visible. If your spirit is not fit to see the Simorgh, neither will your heart be a bright mirror fit to reflect him. It is true that no eye is able to contemplate and marvel at his beauty, nor is it capable of understanding. One cannot feel towards the Simorgh as one feels towards the beauty of this world. But by his abounding grace, he has given us a mirror to reflect himself, and this mirror is the heart. Look into your heart, and there you will see his image. This may remind us of certain of the hidden words of Baha'u'llah. Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, mighty, powerful, and self-subsisting. A little further down, he says, all appearances are nothing but the mysterious shadow of the Simorgh. If he had revealed his beauty to you, you would have recognized it in his shadow. Whether there were 30 birds, Simorgh, or 40, you would only see his shadow. The Simorgh is not distinct from his shadow. To hold the contrary is to err. The one and the other exist together. Seek reunion, or better, leave the shadow, and you will discover the secret. With good fortune, you will see the sun in the shadow. But if you lose yourself in the shadow, how will you achieve union with the Simorgh? There's I think a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha where he refers to this nether plane as the real world, as being the realm of the kingdom, or the Malakut. And he says this nether world of Nasut is just its shadow stretching out, echoing a little bit this idea of the world of appearances being the shadow of something greater, which itself goes back. I have to mention Plato at some point. Plato's basic idea is that this world, in a way, is a shadow cast by the archetypes, by the forms. That everything in the world tells out and is expressive of a layer of reality deeper than appearances. And that's very much a mystical theme throughout the ages. So, this idea of the simorg as being the representing in some way the unity of the lover and the beloved is one example of how love is a central theme of the mystical quest, and how human love is also a metaphor for divine love. And we see this very much in Baha'u'llah's writings, not just from this period, not just in the Seven Valleys, but also in some of his other tablets describing the maid of heaven and his encounter with the maid of heaven, ecstatic union, even the divine erotic put in those terms. Sometimes the highest mystical states are defined in erotic terms. This is the case also in the Song of Songs in the Old Testament. There's a long tradition of that mystic union being described in very visceral human terms. And this is also an example of one being the shadow of the other, that there are shadows cast by the archetypes. And if there's an archetypal love, then one of the shadows of that archetypal love cast in the world is the love between human beings. But it's interesting, however deep the themes that run through the Seven Valleys, and however deep its resonance with the mystical works of the past. Interesting how Baha'u'llah contextualizes and almost limits the message of the Seven Valleys later on in the Akka period. When asked about the Seven Valleys and what he was saying in it, Baha'u'llah says the following. He said, "This treatise was revealed in the language of the people in the days prior to our declaration. The occasion for its revelation was the receipt of a letter addressed to the Most Holy Court in Iraq from a man of Sunni persuasion, who was both a scholar and a mystic. This treatise was therefore revealed in accordance with divine wisdom in the manner that was current amongst the people. However, in this day, every soul who hath fixed his gaze upon the supreme horizon and hath recognized the one true God hath verily attained unto every one of the seven valleys or seven stages mentioned therein." And the tablet goes on to say, "For in this dispensation every idle fancy hath been cleft asunder, and all have been instructed, when once they have recognized God, to acquire such knowledge as can profit humanity, and to forsake the pursuit of imaginary attainments." So in light of this contextualization of the Seven Valleys, one might ask the question, well, why bother? Why bother with this book when Baha'u'llah says, well, in the end, if you recognize me, you've attained all these seven valleys? Is it the case that he was merely taking the opportunity to speak to someone in the language that they could understand? And since they were a mystic and they resonated with the idea of valleys and the mystical quest and all of this, so Baha'u'llah chose to speak in that language. Is that all that's happening? Or is there how can we understand and how can we read the seven valleys? And I would like to suggest that there are a couple of things happening in the seven valleys. That indeed it is a mystical work. It is an expression, or very much a re-expression and a reaffirmation of the central ideas of mystical literature throughout the ages, and in particular in an Islamic context. It is that, and that is at one level what Baha'u'llah is saying. But just as with the Rashi Amma, which we discussed last week, Baha'u'llah is speaking in more than one level simultaneously. He's speaking at the level of the mystic, talking about the individual spiritual quest. He's conveying something new, there is something new and revolutionary being being said here for those who have the ear to hear it. And that revolutionary thing that's being said has something to do with the message that Baha'u'llah is yet concealed and has not yet made made public. It is a message that has something to do with the collective destiny of the human race and Baha'u'llah's role in revealing that collective destiny. There's a letter from Shoghi Effendi which I think expresses that point which I want to suggest about the reading of the Seven Valleys. He says, the Baha'i faith, like all other divine religions, is fundamentally mystic in character. Its chief goal is the development of the individual and society through the acquisition of spiritual virtues and powers. It is the soul of man that first has to be fed, and this spiritual nourishment prayer can best provide. Laws and institutions, as viewed by Baha'u'llah, can become really effective only when our inner spiritual life has been perfected and transformed. Otherwise, religion will degenerate into a mere organization and become a dead thing. So there are two aspects or two dimensions to religion in general. There's the individual level and the collective level. And one cannot reform and transform society on a collective level simply by applying the right laws, simply by putting into effect the right kind of organization. It can only come about, the true transformation of humanity can only come about when the individual consciousness is transformed. The Seven Valleys addresses both of these levels, the one more explicitly and the other implicitly. On the explicit level, the Seven Valleys is re-expressing those timeless truths, the spiritual development of the individual, whose end goal, as described in the Seven Valleys, is the death of self and reunion with God. And this spiritual individual transformation is indeed key to the whole message. And if it doesn't take place, then it was all for nothing in a way. Baha'u'llah states this himself very starkly in the Kitab-i-Igan, where he says, if the character of mankind be not changed, the futility of God's manifestations would be apparent. And Abdu'l-Baha also says this very beautifully in Selections for the Writings of Abdu'l-Baha. It's selection number 2. And unfortunately, I didn't bring that with me. But he says something very similar, that if the bounties of the rays of the Sun of Truth aren't reflected within the reality of man, then it was all for naught. And so the Seven Valleys is charting that path of spiritual transformation, a prelude to the transformation of society. And the transformation of society is in a way the message of Baha'u'llah, which is unique to his revelation. And this is a message which is particularly relevant and needed today, because what Baha'u'llah is giving us in the Seven Valleys is, in relation to the collective dimension, is on the one hand a corrective to certain misconceptions that existed among those to whom he was addressing, the Sufis to whom he was addressing, but also it lays the framework for a future declaration and reorganization of society. It corrects, on the one hand, it corrects misconceptions of the Sufis. For example, it is belief among many Sufis that the mystic goal has as its end point the reunion or fusion of the soul with God, in the sense of there being no separation or barrier. And a point that Baha'u'llah emphasizes in the Seven Valleys is that this direct direct knowledge or encounter with the essence of reality is and forever will be impossible. Not just by the individual, but even the prophet himself, even the manifestation himself, has no direct access. So there is a chasm between creation and the creator. Even though the mystical language of the Sufis tends to reduce that chasm to almost to nothingness. The whole metaphor of the sea morgue is the birds reach the end of the quest and it is them. But Baha'u'llah corrects this in a sense by stating that even that endpoint of the mystic goal cannot touch the ultimate reality of things. Baha'u'llah says this in so many different ways in his writings. It's expressed here in the Seven Valleys, also in, for example, a passage in Gleanings. He says, the conceptions of the devoutest of mystics, the attainments of the most accomplished amongst men, the highest praise which human tongue and pen can render, are all the product of man's finite mind and are conditioned by its limitations. 10,000 prophets, each a Moses, are thunderstruck upon the Sinai of their search at his forbidding voice, "Thou shalt never behold me," whilst a myriad messengers, each as great as Jesus, stand dismayed upon their heavenly thrones by the interdiction, "Mine essence thou shalt never apprehend." So this is one of the correctives that Baha'u'llah is issuing at his Sufi audience. A second one, you might say, a second element of Baha'u'llah's corrective has to do with obedience to the law. Again, some ideas, some of the Sufis believe that when you reach higher degrees of mystic knowledge, that enabled you to it sort of gave you a bit of a free pass as regard to the law itself. You understood what the law was about, and so that puts you in some way above the law. And the path of the Sufi, the tariqat, was something separate from the shari'at, or the law which everyone else followed, the common people followed, was separate from the path of the Sufi. And Baha'u'llah emphasizes towards the end of the Seven Valleys, as we'll see, that the higher realms of consciousness represented by these later valleys are really built upon the lower. They're complementary and not contradictory, which is why even in the final valley, one is not free to dispense with the law. And it also foretells in a bit, or foreshadows, Baha'u'llah's later, even more explicit discouraging of the Sufi practice of extreme asceticism and withdrawal from the world. And Baha'u'llah being more in the world, if not of the world, but not separating oneself from the world. Baha'u'llah explicitly discourages the kind of asceticism, monasticism in some orders that some took to be a requirement of the spiritual path. And whereas Baha'u'llah in the early years, his writings were very much Sufi themed and resonated with this idea of separating from the world. Even Baha'u'llah himself took the 2 years in Kurdistan. Later on, his writings no longer emphasized that as much. It emphasized more the need to be a useful member of society. But these two, I think one can in the end see as being two poles of the human experience, as we'll see in the Four Valleys. There being different modes of being in the world, and perhaps it's more of a feature than a bug of the human spiritual reality, that there are those who are by nature more gregarious and like to be in the world and with people, and others tend to be more loners. That's just kind of the way human beings are, and for each there is a different kind of a spiritual path. So on the one hand, then, to summarize all of this, Baha'u'llah is in conveying something new. He is on the one hand correcting certain ideas which he considered perhaps having moved away from the true message of the Quran and of Islam, but at the same time, he is laying the groundwork for future declaration that entirely transcends the boundaries of Islam and transcends the boundaries of Sufism and everything that went before. And he does this, first of all, in a few places by very barely hinting at his own station. And we find that these hints become progressively more and more clear until we get to the formal declaration of his mission post-1863. But starting with the Seven Valleys, you start seeing hints of it, and you have to really see it with 20/20 hindsight to pick out the places where Baha'u'llah might have been alluding to something that set him apart from just your average, say, Sufi mystic who composes a treatise, because all sorts of Sufi mystics were composing treatises. So what distinguishes Baha'u'llah from these other mystics? What distinguishes the nature of his knowledge from everyday mystical knowledge? And we start seeing hints of that here. But we also see Baha'u'llah laying the groundwork for his own future declaration when he talks about relativizing firstness and lastness. That's a necessary step, a necessary point he has to make to get around what will end up being one of the primary objections to Baha'u'llah's revelation, which is a verse in the Quran that states that Muhammad was a seal of the prophets, and which almost unanimously Muslims interpret as meaning that all revelation ends with Muhammad. And so this idea of the seal of the prophets and of Muhammad being the last prophet is something that Baha'u'llah has to answer and engage with before he can make his own explicit declaration. And he begins engaging with that in the Seven Valleys by relativizing the idea of firstness and lastness. And he deals with it more explicitly in the Kitab-i-Iqan. So we find an evolution and a sort of growing openness of Baha'u'llah's own claim as regards this issue as the years go by up to the year of the revelation. And finally, what I think Baha'u'llah is doing here, and this is implicit, but it's an implicit foundation, but a necessary foundation. Baha'u'llah is providing a practical key to accomplishing his ultimate aim, which is the unification of the world. How does he do that in the Seven Valleys? Because in the Seven Valleys, he doesn't mention oneness of humanity, which is such a principal teaching of Baha'u'llah in his later tablets, is nowhere mentioned here in the Seven Valleys. It's arguably not mentioned in really. There's one hidden word which does state that, but it's not a real focus of his revelation until later on. Instead, Baha'u'llah is laying the foundation for the recognition of the oneness of humanity, because the oneness that Baha'u'llah is aiming at is not the oneness in which everyone becomes the same. It's not a oneness in which somehow all the varying religions and tribes and pathways all recognize their error and adhere to one single pathway in the sense of one single interpretation or one single way of accessing the divine, but rather there are and will always be different paths of approach. There are and will always be different modes of spiritual being in the world, and as a prerequisite then for attaining the unity of the human race, one has to come to terms with its diversity. One has to find a way of embracing and accepting the diversity of the human spiritual experience, the diversity of the human cultural experience, in a way that affirms the differences, but finds a larger framework within which those differences can find common cause. And Baha'u'llah does this in the Seven Valleys in terms of the paths which are described in the Seven Valleys, but more broadly in the Call of the Divine Beloved itself in the varying tablets that comprise this volume. Baha'u'llah is giving us a key to unlocking the possibility of a world which is characterized by unity and diversity, by describing different spiritual paths, not in the sense of varying degrees of error on their way to something which is more true, which would then imply that there's ultimately a single truth that everyone will eventually land at, but rather he's describing different modes of approach, all of which are correct within their own station. And this idea of relativity of spiritual truth, which Shoghi Effendi later states is one of the fundamental verities of the Baha'i faith, it is described here in the Seven Valleys, and even more explicitly in Gems of Divine Mysteries, as in such terms that those in one valley reject the views of those in another valley as heresy, as irreligion itself. And the same is true of those in that other valley. That the sense of the rightness of one's own spiritual views is such that it entails a rejection of those who are in another valley. But Baha'u'llah says that they're both correct within their own station. They only become incorrect when they fight about it. So, another way this is put is in one of the a hadith or a tradition of Islam, that the good deeds of the righteous are the sins of the near ones. That there are views and positions that are good in and of themselves, but viewed from another perspective, they can become the very essence of ungodliness. And this is, I think, a key. I see this as a key to Baha'u'llah's practical program to unite the world, because one has to lay the foundations for how we are actually to achieve unity and diversity. And if that is not to involve a kind of monoculture, if that is not to involve a scenario in which a single doctrine and a single view of things ends up becoming entirely dominant and washes out all of the other views. If that's not the future that we imagine, but we imagine a future in which people will continue to have different opinions, even about fundamental questions, as the nature of God and the nature of the soul, I believe that Baha'u'llah's revelation interpretations. And part of the making room for that is I believe, Baha'u'llah's project in the Seven Valleys and in these mystical tablets. So in that sense, the Seven Valleys is a means to a larger end. I mean, he's using the Seven Valleys as a frame story, although expressing truths. I mean, it's not a throwaway kind of story, but he's expressing fundamental truths which are in themselves correct. But he, as he later said in the Akka period, as he himself said in the Akka period, the points that he was making there are ultimately subservient to a larger message that he was trying to convey. So let's turn then to the text itself. And we'll be going through it in some detail, certainly initially. Whether we'll end up reading sentence for sentence remains to be seen. But we'll at least start off looking at it in a fair bit of detail. The tablet, although is written largely in Persian, it begins in Arabic. The first several paragraphs are actually in Arabic. And just to give you a sense of the sound of it, I'll read the Arabic to you, beginning with this exposition of the mysteries. There's a bit of rhyme at the beginning. He says, "Zikr al-asrar fi ma'arij al-asfar liman yuridu an yusafir ila Allah muqtadir al-ghaffar." Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And you may have heard that phrase before. That's the phrase, the Bismillah that opens each of the surahs of the Quran. Alhamdulillah alladhi athara al-wujud min al-adam wa raqama ala Allah al-insan min asrar al-qidam wa allamahu min al-bayan ma la ya'lam wa ja'alahu kitaban mubinan liman amana wa istaslam wa ashhadahu khalqa kulli shay fi hadha al-zaman al-mudlim al-saylam wa انتقه في قطب البقاء على اللحن البديع في الهيكل المكرم ليشهد الكل في نفسه بنفسه في مقام تجلى ربه بأنه لا إله إلا هو وليصل الكل بذلك إلى ذروة الحق أحد شيئا إلا وقد يرى الله فيه. Or praise be to God who hath made being to come forth from nothingness, graven upon the tablet of man a measure of the mysteries of his eternity, taught him from the storehouse of divine utterance that which he knew not, made him a perspicuous book unto such as have believed and surrendered their souls, given him to behold in this dark and ruinous age a new creation within all things, and caused him to speak forth from the midmost heart of eternity in a new and wondrous voice, embodied in the most excellent temple. And all to this end, that every man may testify in himself and by himself before the seat of the revelation of his Lord, that there is none other God but him, and that all may reach that summit of realities, where none shall contemplate anything, but that he shall perceive God therein. This is the vision of the splendors which have been deposited within the realities of all things. For otherwise he, exalted be his glory, is entirely sanctified, seen or witnessed. No vision taketh in him, but he taketh in all vision. He is the subtle, the all-perceiving. These last few sentences, that this is the vision of the splendors, was not in the original translation, but it was in the manuscript that was used as a basis for the translation. As well, the opening line in Exposition of the Mysteries was also not in the original translation, but it's in the manuscript that was used. And actually, that first edition of the Seven Values that we have also includes this line, which also very closely parallels the opening line of Gems of Divine Mystery. So if you sort of compare them side by side, they are almost word for word the same. So Baha'u'llah begins this in a very traditional style. It's called an exordium, or you could call it an exordium. The traditional format of any theological composition in Islam is that you always begin by doing three things. You praise God, and then you praise his family. And this is what Baha'u'llah has done in these first paragraphs. The first paragraph, which I just read, is his praise of God, and then the second paragraph praises Muhammad, and then the final sentence, and upon his kindred and his companions be abundant, abiding, and eternal peace. So this is a very traditional way of opening. But Baha'u'llah is already doing something, I think, a little bit non-traditional in his praise of God in the opening paragraph, where he says, he hath made being come forth from nothingness, graven upon the tablet of man a measure of the mysteries of his eternity. He is already introducing the idea of the prophet, this tablet of man. You'll notice that introducing the idea of the prophet as being the sole channel or means of the understanding and comprehension of God. You'll notice that the word man is not uppercased here when he refers to the tablet of man, upon which have been graven a measure of the mysteries of his eternity. And because there's some ambiguity as to what Baha'u'llah is referring to, who is this tablet of man? Is he talking just about the prophet, or is he talking about people in general? And you could read it either way. There's some ambiguity in this paragraph that he could be referring to man here in a more, let's say, archetypal sense, of the human soul in general, of being the receptacle or the potential receptacle of mysteries. But as the paragraph proceeds, it seems that he, at least in some way, is indeed referring to the manifestation. But but this idea of ambiguity and maybe intentional ambiguity is not unique at all to this tablet. You will find it also in other writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, where exordiums begin with a kind of ambiguity. In Baha'u'llah's Tablet of the Universe, for example, he talks about the planets and the stars, and it's not really clear in that opening paragraph where there are the planets and the stars. By them, he's referring to the prophets as the stars in the heaven of understanding, or whether he's referring to the physical planets. And as it moves on, that ambiguity, which is a feature of the original, ends up getting resolved. And I think it's a similar thing that's happening here. And the idea of that this tablet of man could be referring to us potentially is given, I think, a bit of it's underlined a little bit by a letter of the Guardian, which on behalf of the Guardian, which in reference to the earlier translation of this, which said, "Graven upon the tablet of man, the mysteries of pre-existence," I think it said, and Shoghi Effendi wrote, "This in no way presupposes the existence of the individual soul before conception. The term has not been absolutely accurately translated, and what is meant is that man's soul is the repository of the ancient divine mysteries of God." So Shoghi Effendi, in interpreting this mysteries of pre-existence, he said the translation isn't quite right, but he interprets it in a way that could apply to all humanity. And so partly in response to this letter on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, the pre-existence was corrected to a measure of the mysteries of his eternity. So there's a sense in which this could be us, but also there's very much a sense in which this is describing the mission of the manifestation. In this dark and ruinous age, a new creation within all things. The age preceding every revelation is its own way dark and ruinous, in that there's a cyclicality to the comings and goings of the prophets, and the hour before the dawn is always the darkest. The prophet speaks forth, or the tablet of man, the reality of man, is caused to speak forth from the midmost heart of eternity, and in a new and wondrous voice embodied in the most excellent temple. All of this probably refers to the manifestation, or at least the idea of midmost heart of eternity, this qutb al-baqa. In Sufism, Baha'u'llah is perhaps referring to the qutb, or midmost, which here is translated as midmost heart, is often refers to the pole, or the individual who is the source of divine inspiration, which may be the spiritual guide of the Sufi. Baha'u'llah is basically giving us a preview of the endpoint of the spiritual journey in this paragraph, that the endpoint of which that one reaches a point where you see nothing, you don't contemplate anything, but that you see or perceive God therein. In the second paragraph, then, Baha'u'llah turns to the praise of Muhammad, and in doing so, he unleashes a whole bunch of mystical vocabulary that we also saw in the Rashiyama last week. The ocean of the unseen essence of Hoviyat, the horizon of singleness is the horizon of Ahadiyat, which we talked about last week, and contrasted the two different kinds of unity, the singleness of God, which is a singleness without, let's say, inner articulations, contrasted with the singleness, the Vahidiyya, which is here translated niche of oneness, which is a oneness that could be thought of as being comprised of different parts. And so we have a lot of the sort of mystical vocabulary of oneness and essence in this, of which Muhammad is the manifestation. And then finally tying it off by referring to the family of Muhammad and his kindred. Then he gets down to business, although we're still in Arabic. To continue in paragraph 3, I've hearkened to the song of knowledge upon the twigs of the tree, upon the branches of the bower of thine heart. Methinks I inhaled the fragrance of purity from the raiment of thy love, and in perusing thy letter, attained to thy very presence. I noted, moreover, thine allusions to thy death in God and thy life through him, and the love thou dost cherish for the beloved of the Lord, and for the manifestations of his names and the exponents of his attributes. And this death in God and life through him is fana and baqa, which are the two, you can think of them as the final two stages of in the mystical quest, of which only the first of those two is described here in the Seven Valleys. The seventh valley is the fana. It's the valley of self, of the annihilation of the self. But that's followed in some of the schemes of the Sufis by baqa, or life in God. But that life in God is different from the life that precedes it. And we'll see in other of in Gems of Divine Mysteries, for example, Baha'u'llah goes beyond the seventh valley to one or two valleys beyond that. So this is references those two key stages here. Baha'u'llah then says, I have purposed therefore to acquaint thee with holy and resplendent tokens from the realms of might and glory, that haply they may draw thee nigh into the court of holiness, nearness, and beauty, and draw thee to a station wherein thou shalt see not in all existence but the hallowed countenance of thy beloved, and wilt behold all of creation as a day whereon none was deemed worthy of mention. This is one of those places where Baha'u'llah there's an assumed standpoint of knowledge here that Baha'u'llah is in possession of some mystical truth that he's going to dispense to the questioner. At this point, it's not. One really has to look with 20/20 hindsight to see an implicit claim, but it doesn't at this stage, I think, raise to the level of necessarily a claim to independent divine inspiration. He then, in the next paragraph, I think what's happening here is the seeker probably asked him about a mystical treatise, which in the original translation was the garden, was translated literally as the Garden of Gaussier, and it was retranslated as, of this did the Nightingale of Oneness sing in the garden of his mystical treatise, saying, and there shall appear upon the tablet of thine heart an inscription of the subtle mysteries, and it goes on to the end of the paragraph, quoting a treatise by Gilani, who I believe was also known by the title Gauss. And so by referring to the Garden of Gaussier, it probably is referring to the garden of the treatise that this individual had written. And so it's probable, or at least highly possible, that at least in part the Seven Valleys was written in answer to questions like this. Like he was probably asking, what did he mean by this? In particular, the idea of almost there being a precognitive knowledge. The bird of thy spirit shall recall the sanctuaries of ancient splendors. So was that, is the mystical knowledge already in us? Or is it something that just has to be revealed, or is it something that has to be imparted to us? Those are the kinds of questions that Baha'u'llah might have been asked, and which the Seven Valleys is an answer to. And then he goes on in the fifth paragraph to say that wert thou to taste the fruits of these verdant trees that spring from the soil of true understanding, once the effulgent light of his essence hath been reflected in the mirrors of his names and attributes. And a comma got dropped here. Yearning would seize the reins of patience and restraint from out thy hand, and stir thy spirit into commotion with the splendors of his light. heavenly habitation in the midmost heart of mystic knowledge, and raise thee to a station wherein thou wilt soar in the air, even as thou treadest upon the earth, and wilt walk upon the water, even as thou movest over the land. Wherefore may it rejoice me and thee, and whosoever mounteth into the heaven of knowledge, and whose heart hath been revived by the breezes of certitude that waft from the Sheba of the All-Merciful upon the meadow of his inner being. Peace be upon him who followeth the way of guidance. So this ends the introductory portion, and this promise of that Baha'u'llah is issuing of great spiritual commotion that will ensue if Baha'u'llah's true intention here is understood. From this point forward, Baha'u'llah switches from Arabic to Persian, and then begins the exposition of the seven valleys proper. And further, the stages that mark the wayfarer's journey from their mortal abode to the heavenly homeland are said to be seven. Some have referred to them as seven valleys, and others as seven cities. And it is said that until the wayfarer taketh leave of self and traverseth these stages, he shall never attain the ocean of nearness and reunion, nor taste of the matchless wine. In the original translation, the seven valleys are broken out almost chapter-like and headed the Valley of Search, the Valley of Love, the Valley of Unity, and so forth. But it was not a feature of the original text. And in the original text, some are called valleys, one is called a city, one is called a stage. There isn't, Baha'u'llah doesn't refer to them consistently as valleys. And so it was, I guess, an interpretive choice previously to break them out and label them all as valleys. And the new translation adheres a little bit closer to the Persian text, and also in not breaking it out paragraph-wise. The first of the valleys is the Valley of Search, the steed of which is patience. And Baha'u'llah says, without patience, the wayfarer on this journey will reach nowhere and attain no goal, nor should he ever become downhearted. If he strive for 100,000 years and yet fail to behold the beauty of the friend, he should not falter. For those who seek the Kaaba, or the ultimate goal of for us, rejoice in the tidings. In our ways shall we assuredly guide them. This is a reference to a verse in the Quran that says, and whoso maketh efforts for us, in our ways shall we assuredly guide them. So Baha'u'llah is referring to the need to make a vast amount of effort that may, in fact, be unrewarded indefinitely. But he says they should never be downhearted because of this. In their search, they have stoutly girded up the loins of service, and at every moment journey from the plane of heedlessness into the realm of search. No bond shall hold them back, and no counsel deter them. One might infer from this that there's a valley 0 before the first valley. You know, it's not like everyone is in the Valley of Search. Most people, one might say, are in the plane of heedlessness and haven't even entered into the Valley of Search. It includes most of mankind. So already when you're talking about the first valley, you're talking about some small minority of people who are actually in the stage of active searching, and the rest being in the plane of heedlessness. So valley 0, and then the 7 valleys that follow. He said, it is incumbent upon these servants to cleanse the heart, which is the wellspring of divine treasures of every marking. Turn away from imitation, which is following the traces of their forefathers, and shut the door of friendship and enmity upon all the people of the earth. The idea of the importance of search and of cleansing the heart, of purity of heart as a prerequisite, as an essential spiritual prerequisite, is stated clearly here in the 7 valleys, as it is also stated very clearly in the hidden words, the first of the Arabic hidden words. My first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. And also in the Kitab-i-Igan, when Baha'u'llah describes the path and the prerequisites of the true seeker, he also emphasizes this need for the cleansing and purification of the heart. He says, "But, O my brother, when a true seeker determines to take the step of search in the path leading to the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, he must before all else cleanse and purify his heart, which is the seat of the revelation of the inner mysteries of God, from the obscuring dust of all acquired knowledge and the illusions of the embodiments of satanic fancy. He must purge his breast, which is the sanctuary of the abiding love of the beloved, of every defilement, and sanctify his soul from all that pertaineth to water and clay, from all shadowy and ephemeral attachments. He must so cleanse his heart that no remnant of either love or hate may linger therein, lest that love blindly incline him to error, or that hate repel him away from the truth, even as thou dost witness in this day, how most of the people, because of such love and hate, are bereft of the immortal face, have strayed far from the embodiments of the divine mysteries, and shepherdless are roaming through the wilderness of oblivion and error." So in the Book of Certitude, Baha'u'llah describes the state of search as something in which love itself is a kind of a veil. And Baha'u'llah says the same thing in the valleys about having to shut, as he says in this valley of search. In the next paragraph, paragraph 8, he says, "It is incumbent upon these servants to cleanse the heart, which is the wellspring of divine treasures of every marking, turn away from imitation, which is the following of the traces of their forefathers, and shut the door of friendship and enmity upon all the people of the earth." Someone asked Shoghi Effendi what this means, because it seems a little bit harsh or unrealistic or unspiritual even. I mean, if the object is love of humanity, then why would one of the initial stages be not loving humanity? Why would one of the initial stages be sort of not being friends with people? And so Shoghi Effendi wrote in response to someone who asked him about this. He said, "We must never take one sentence in the teachings and isolate it from the rest. It does not mean we must not love, but we must reach a spiritual plane where God comes first, and great human passions are unable to turn us away from him. All the time we see people who, either through the force of hate or the passionate attachment they have to this principle, or bar themselves from the path of God." So that needs to be seen in a larger context, and and also this idea that one can search and search for 100,000 years and never behold the beauty of the friend seems to, in this valley, seems to put the goal unattainably into some unattainable distance. And here's again where it helps to look at the topic of spiritual search in the context of other passages in Baha'u'llah's writings, some of which, as here, place it as this unattainable goal, and others which place it as something which is very much near and attainable, even attainable in the sense of it being a breath away or a step away. Baha'u'llah, emphasizing the need and importance of spiritual search in gleaning, says, "O my servants, were ye to discover the hidden, the shoreless ocean of my incorruptible wealth, you would of a certainty esteem as nothing the world, nay, the entire creation. Let the flame of search burn with such fierceness in your hearts as to enable you to attain your supreme and most exalted goal, the station at which you can draw nigh unto and be united with your best beloved." And just a page or two beyond that. "O my servants, my holy, my divinely ordained revelation may be likened unto an ocean in whose depths are concealed innumerable pearls of great price, of surpassing luster. It is the duty of every seeker to bestir himself and strive to attain the shores of this ocean, so that he may, in proportion to the eagerness of his search and the efforts he hath exerted, partake of such benefits as have been preordained in God's irrevocable tablets. If no one be willing to direct his steps towards these shores, can such a failure be said to have robbed this ocean of any of its treasures? O my servant, the one true God is my witness. This most great, this fathomless and surging ocean is near, astonishingly near unto you. Behold, it is closer to you than your life's vein. Swift as the twinkling of an eye, ye can, if ye but wish it, reach and partake of this imperishable favor, this God-given grace, this most potent and unspeakably glorious bounty. And again, in the hidden words, emphasizing the nearness of it, Baha'u'llah says, O son of love, thou art but one step away from the glorious heights above and from the celestial tree of love. Take thou one pace, and with the next, advance into the immortal realm and enter the pavilion of eternity. So it's almost a paradox then, that something so near can at the same time be so far away. And I guess part of the paradox, I guess, is that it's a two-way street. I mean, it's so near in the sense that the loved one is calling the lovers to attain him, and this call of the beloved, the call of the divine beloved, is at every moment being issued. It's like the sun which is always shining. It's always there. In that sense, it's always very close to us. But it's us who are far from it. But we're not far from it in the sense that it's not surrounding us. We're far from it more in the sense of a mirror whose back is turned to the sun. And as long as its back is turned to the sun can still be shining on it. But until it turns the mirror to reflect the light of the sun, the face of the mirror remains dark. So that 100,000 years can be, the time it takes for us to understand that the beloved was always there. The divine grace was always just one breath away. But the turning of the mirror is the sort of the key to the mystical quest and the secret of life in a way, is knowing how to turn that mirror. Baha'u'llah in giving some advice about how to reach that stage, how to learn how to turn that mirror. It's interesting how he emphasizes more than once that one associates with others in the process. And this is, again, an implicit rejection of the idea that one finds the ultimate object of one's quest by severing oneself from human society and going off in the wilderness and having that experience on one's own. Instead, he says in paragraph 9, he says, in this journey the seeker reacheth the station wherein he seeth all created things wandering distracted in search of the friend. How many a Jacob will he see searching after his Joseph? How many a lover will he behold hastening towards the well-beloved? A world of adoring souls will he witness tracing the path to the adored one. At every moment he findeth a weighty matter. In every hour he becometh aware of a new mystery. For he hath severed his heart from both worlds and set out for the Kaaba of the beloved. At every step aid from the invisible realm will attend him, and the fervor of his search will grow. So one is seeing this in the world, and we see this also in paragraph 13. To jump forward a bit, he says, on this journey the wayfarer dwelleth in every abode, however humble, and resideth in every land. In every face he seeketh the friend. In every region he searcheth after the beloved. He joineth every company, and seeketh fellowship with every soul, that happily in some heart he may discern the secret of the beloved, or in some face behold the beauty of the adored one. What he's prescribing here is such an openness. It's like, go out into the world, experience the full diversity of the world. Mix with people of other cultures, of other races, of other religions and backgrounds, and it's in doing so that one might find that spark of the divine that you don't find in your own culture. You don't find in the way of being and thinking that you grew up in, but you might see it in others just because of that difference sort of enables you to detect that spark. Going back to paragraph 10, he says, one must judge of search by the standard of the Majnun of love. It is related that one day they came upon Majnun sifting the dust, his tears flowing down. They asked, what doest thou? He said, I seek for Layli. Alas for thee, they cried. Layli is of pure spirit, yet thou seekest her in the dust. He said, I seek her everywhere. Happily, somewhere I shall find her. Yea, though to the wise it be shameful to seek the Lord of lords in the dust, yet this betokeneth intent searching. Whoso seeketh out a thing and persisteth with zeal shall find it. It's interesting here how Baha'u'llah describes the state of search that one should be in, almost identically with the state of love. And he actually brings in Majnun, who is the epitome of love, and says this needs to characterize the search. But if you look at it in order, you say, well, search comes before love. So how can you be in the state of the abandonment of love, just like Majnun, before you even reach the valley of love? And it's almost as though there's a continuous, the valley of search and the valley of love are almost merged in a way, in the way Baha'u'llah describes it here, as they are really almost merged in Baha'u'llah's description of the attributes and the hallmark of the spiritually minded in the seven valleys. And listen how he describes it here. Having described all these prerequisites, listen how he continuously moves from search to utmost love and ecstasy as the prerequisite of attainment to the city of certitude. He said, and it's almost like an ascending scale. Only when the lamp of search, striving, of longing desire, of passionate devotion, of fervid love, of rapture and ecstasy is kindled within the seeker's heart, and the breeze of his loving kindness is wafted upon his soul, will the darkness of error be dispelled, the mists of doubts and misgivings be dissipated, and the lights of knowledge and certitude envelop his being. It passes from search all the way to ecstasy, and kind of, it all gets thrown into one sentence, and encompasses, the first of the two valleys. And so it's almost as though Baha'u'llah is saying the first two valleys are the prerequisites of search, and then the valley of knowledge, which is the third valley, is the city of certitude that one then attains in the Kitab-i-Yagan, if one wants to try to line them up against each other. So finally, in the 12th paragraph, last paragraph on search that we haven't read yet, he said, the true seeker hunteth not but the object of his quest, and the sincere lover hath no desire save reunion with his beloved. Nor shall the seeker reach his goal unless he sacrifice all things. That is, whatever he hath seen and heard and understood, all must he set at naught, with no God is there, that he may enter into the realm of the spirit, which is the city of but God. And this was the same, Baha'u'llah did the same thing that Rashi Ammar remembered about the drum, the hand that drums. It's the drum of the law, and we talked about how that is an allusion to the la, this la ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. It begins with a negation and it ends with affirmation. Baha'u'llah again refers to that here about one has to set it not with no God is there. One begins with a negation. You have to set aside everything that you thought you knew to open yourself up to seeing things in a very different way, that he may enter into the realm of the spirit, which is the city of but God. Baha'u'llah says the same thing about this need to sacrifice all things in the Persian hidden word number 11, which unfortunately I didn't bring with me either, but this is the one where he says, blind thine eyes that thou mayest behold my beauty, stop thine ears that thou mayest hearken to the sweet melody of my voice, empty thyself of all knowledge save the knowledge of me. And again, re-expressing this idea of having to the cup having to be emptied before it can be filled again. Emptied of what it had, what it contained before. And if by the help of the Creator he findeth on this journey a trace of the traceless friend, and inhaleth the fragrance of the long-lost Joseph from the heavenly herald, he shall straightway step into the valley of love, and be consumed in the fire of love. In this city the heaven of rapture is upraised, and the world-illuming sun of yearning shineth, and the fire of love is ablaze. And when the fire of love is ablaze, it burneth to ashes the harvest of reason. And we'll look at the valley of love next week. But I just want to mention, it's interesting what values are here and what values aren't here. He passes from the valley of search to the valley of love, and then goes on to these higher degrees of mystical attainment. And the next valley is the valley of knowledge, but this isn't the valley of knowledge in the sense of acquired learning or logic, or where there's no valley of those who are immersed in logical proofs for God's existence. Right? It's not even a valley. It's not even like, as he's charting the stages of the seeker, it isn't worthy of mention, almost that there's at least in the context of this the seeker. There isn't a sense that one of the stages of the spiritual quest is one where one is bound by rationality. And one thinks of love as, one might think of love as being the highest state. Once you're enabled to set aside all the logical proofs and trying to establish things through everything through the head, and once you realize everything through the heart, you might think that's your, that is a high, if not the highest, degree of understanding and intuition of things. But it's only the second valley, and the valley of love, this valley of coming into the this ecstatic realization of things, is for Baha'u'llah one of the earliest stages of limitation. And as he says later on, love is a veil between the lover and the beloved. More than this I am not permitted to tell. But of course he tells a lot about it in the valleys to come, which we will start looking at next week. So any thoughts or comments on what we've read up to this point?
It's interesting, the metaphor of valleys, because in Tao they use that metaphor of valleys a lot.
Yeah.
They use water and of going to the seminal experience.
Yeah.
That is past the surface experience.
Yeah. I've read about that too. Can you say more about that? Like the often used quote is that people seek, the virtuous seek the lowest place where people despise. And on the surface, it sounds like, wow, you steep all the way down. But in a metaphoric way, it's saying despise in the sense that you withdraw from the surface experience of life because that bedazzles you in a way that does not take you to your source. So when you were talking about the conflict between disengaging from your friends and family versus engaging in the world, that metaphor applies in the sense that you're just moving within the strata of experience, but you're not disconnected, and you're just going back to a seminal source, the spiritual, the soulful interaction. Yeah.
I think the expression too of becoming able to be
of the world
is such a pillar for all of this, and something that we all strive for. And when you first talked about this seeming contradiction between, getting rid of all love and hate, to me, I related to that in the sense of the imitation which we follow in terms of our definition and understanding of these terms. We have to let it go, so that we can be free and open to take in what it is that we're searching for.
Well, I was going to say that how humanity will be happy is by obeying the laws of Baha'u'llah, which are hard to obey. And without deep love for Baha'u'llah, we really don't have any hope of obeying his laws. So, to me, that's the most practical. I mean, Baha'u'llah woos us so much to obey him through this loving promise of ecstasy
so we have a little bit more time next week to talk about the value of love. Let me just read to you how Dick Davis has translated part of the value of love in in Attar's Conference of the Birds. And this, he chose, this translator chose to translate it entirely in rhymed verse. So it has a nice ring to it. But, and this is how he captures, and you'll hear, as you read this, and think of how Baha'u'llah describes the value of love and the similarities, particularly as regards this love as representing the abandonment of reason. He says, Love's valley is the next, and here desire will plunge the pilgrim into seas of fire, until his very being is inflamed, and those whom fire rejects turn back ashamed. The lover is a man who flares and burns, whose face is fevered, who in frenzy yearns, who knows no prudence, who will gladly send 100 worlds toward their blazing end, who knows of neither faith nor blasphemy, who has no time for doubt or certainty, to whom both good and evil are the same, and who is neither but a living flame. But you, lukewarm in all you say or do, backsliding, weak, oh no, this is not you. True lovers give up everything they own to steal one moment with the friend alone. They make no vague, procrastinating vow, but risk their livelihood and risk it now, until their hearts are burnt. How can they flee from their desires' incessant misery? They are the falcon when it flies distressed in circles, searching for its absent nest. They are the fish cast upon the land that seeks the sea and shudders on the sand. Love here is fire. Its thick smoke clouds the head. When love has come, the intellect has fled. It cannot tutor love, and all its care supplies no remedy for love's despair. If you could see the unseen, you would find love's home, which is not reason or the mind, and love's intoxication tumbles down the world's designs for glory and renown. If you could penetrate their passing show and see the world's wild atoms, you would know that reason's eyes will never glimpse one spark of shining love to mitigate the dark. Love leads whosoever starts along our way. The noblest bow to love and must obey. But you, unwilling both to love and tread the pilgrim's path, you might as well be dead. The lover chafes, impatient to depart, and longs to sacrifice his life and heart. So, thanks for coming, and come back next week for more on love.